First up, almost needs no introduction, is Alasdair Coles. Alasdair is, he's something completely correct. He's an academic neurologist. He does clinical work for several days a week, and he's also ordained as priest in the Church of England.
Thank you. So 20 minutes. So does Parkinson's disease affect faith? This is a study that Claire Redfern and I have done, and through due diligence, I should tell you it's submitted, but it has not yet been subject to peer review, so take it with that. Can I remind you about Parkinson's disease? It is a disease of movement where people have reduced mobility, increased stiffness and tremor, but it also is associated with depression, and there are cognitive symptoms which appear early on in the disease and progress through, in some cases, but not all, to dementia. And there are impacts in terms of lifestyle factors, earning capacity, and ability to hold down relationships. The beginning of Parkinson's disease can be attributed to a very selective neuronal loss, and that's important for people like me who are neuroanatomically focused. So, two immediate questions might be, why study Parkinson's disease? Well, firstly, if I get it, if my spouse gets it, if my patient gets it, if the member of my congregation gets it, what might happen to their spirituality? For me, as a neuroanatomically orientated person, it's interesting to speculate about whether damage to that particular part of the brain, due to Parkinson's disease, might lead to a direct effect on the brain's ability to subserve religion. But also there are other questions. Does it actually help someone going through Parkinson's disease if they have a faith? Does that help them cope with the illness? Even more provocatively, does having a serious illness like Parkinson's disease actually lead to a positive change in someone's spirituality or religiosity? So dealing with this first issue of, does Parkinson's disease worsen faith or religiosity through a pathological mechanism? Well, how might that come about? So something about Parkinson's disease leads to impaired mobility, as I've said, and that has the very simple impact of reducing one's ability to attend church and a place of worship. And to the extent that that is an expression of religiosity, that will be reduced, potentially. Something about Parkinson's leads to depression. That may well have an impact on motivation to pray, to be engaged with matters of the spiritual. Cognitive deficits might lead to, say, reduced understanding, reduced memory, and we've had some examples of that. And then there's this issue of whether or not the pathology of Parkinson's disease has a selective impairment on religious cognition that is separate from and distinct from these other, as it were, non-specific components. So those are potential ways in which a pathology of Parkinson's disease might lead to impaired spirituality. So what does the literature say? Well, one of the striking things about the neurological literature on Parkinson's disease is there has only been one group studying this. Only one group has taken standard approaches, and this is a group from Boston with Patrick McNamara as the lead. And I think that is interesting and embarrassing for my tribe. And it speaks to my tribe's reluctance to study religiosity and spirituality in these illnesses, because surely, given that Parkinson's disease is a common disease, and as I've said before, I'm going to say again, that being religious is a normal state of affairs for a normal human being, why have people not looked at this more frequently? It must be because of some inhibitions on behalf of neurologists, neuroscientists, their funding bodies, and so on. Now, Patrick McNamara's studies have all concluded that there is a selective deficit of religiosity due to Parkinson's disease. So they make the claim that there is something about the basal ganglia that is important for religiosity, and that Parkinson's disease selectively damages the basal ganglia, and so you see selective impairment of the ability to have a faith in Parkinson's disease. That is in the literature scientifically. It's actually also in patient information sheets in the United States. So if you have Parkinson's disease and you're given an information sheet, one of the things you'll be told is that this may impair your faith. And this is built on these 3 studies, only 3. Now, one of the criticisms that we had about all of these studies is the controls. So only 2 of the studies actually had a control, the third had no controls. So the first of McNamara studies compared people with Parkinson's disease with healthy controls. The second one compared people with Parkinson's disease with people who had chronic health conditions which were non-neurological, but these consisted, some of them, of, for instance, high cholesterol or high blood pressure. Now, the reason why this is important, and those of you who are not in my world may not sense the weight and importance of this, is the purpose of a control is to provide as close a match to the target group as you can, leaving only the deficit you really want to study intact. So, to make this clear, if you're healthy, you're fully mobile. If you have Parkinson's, you're not. So any difference we might see in religiosity might simply be due down to the fact that you're less mobile, or more depressed, or more socially isolated, or have more dementia. Now, we're getting a bit better here. People with back pain and arthritis are less mobile, but people with high cholesterol and high blood pressure are as mobile as a healthy person. So our criticism of these studies is now to the controls, and so we thought carefully about the controls that we would use, and we are using in this study both internal and external controls, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So our study consists of 42 people with Parkinson's and 39 controls. These 39 external controls all had diseases which caused disability, motor disability, and due to diseases that were not affecting the brain, so rheumatoid arthritis, lung diseases, and vasculitis, a rather rare disease, and we matched patients with motor disability. Importantly, and this isn't true of the McNamara studies, we identified patients with Parkinson's or controls on the basis of the next patient to appear in clinic. So there was no selection based on religious commitment on our behalf, although clearly patients will have declared an interest and willingness to participate based on something about the study that was attractive to them, and that may have been its focus on religiosity. But we did not select on the basis of any religious commitment. We had this comparison of people with Parkinson's disease versus motor disabled controls as an external control, but we also used internal controls, and what I mean by that is that we studied these 2 cohorts at what we call baseline and then a year later. And so we compared not only people with Parkinson's disease versus controls, but we compared the effects of 1 year's experience of Parkinson's disease on that group internally. So it might have been the case that people with Parkinson's disease over the course of a year would have a change in their religiosity, and if they did, we could then say, well, what else has changed in that year which might account for it? So that's the internal control. In terms of outcome measures, we use standard measures of mobility and of cognitive function, and I'll come back to that, and we also used interviews, and I'll come back to that. But how do we measure spirituality or religiosity? This is a really difficult issue, and some people here may be much closer to this than we were. We ended up putting a lot of weight on this tool which is widely available and has been widely used. And frankly, that's probably the best thing you can say about it. But actually, that's not to trivialize it, because at least we're talking something that other people understand. And one of the problems in this area of measuring spirituality is many papers and studies have been done with private scales. In other words, the investigators have generated a particular scale of understanding, and you then have to do the work of first understanding the scale, seeing whether it's validated before you can interpret the paper, and I think that's a problem. You might be interested to know that this is really quite a United States orientated scale of religiosity, and one of the things that we did to begin with to try and be as rigorous as we could be is that we showed this scale to a focus group of people with Parkinson's disease in our catchment area in Cambridge and asked them to work through it and comment on it from the perspective of their experience. And actually we made some changes to the language and the terms used in this study as a result of that focus group experience. So, here are the results. This won't take very long. So I thought I would just show you our matching. So these are, remember, two cohorts who have been selected not on the basis of any statement about their religious affiliation. Patients with Parkinson's in grey, these motor disabled controls in white. And these are the broad categories of spirituality and religiosity defined by subgroups, 15, 5, 4, 2 to 30 subgroups within this scale. And I imagine already you're beginning to be concerned about this scale. I mean, what does positive spiritual beliefs mean? What does religious practice mean? I can imagine the queries in your mind, and I accept all of those criticisms. What we end up with is a kind of overall score of religiosity that is based on things like practices. Do people pray every day? Do they read a scriptural text every day? Or is it just every week? Or do they not at all? Do they have positive spiritual beliefs that there is a deity, that that deity cares about them, that deity loves them and is engaged with them on a daily basis, and so on and so forth. Religious support is where the people experience the practical support of the worshipping community, and then people declare themselves to be religious on a certain scale and separately spiritual, and the difference here is around religious practice and commitment and spiritual experiences and transcendence. This is self-reported. An interviewer sits with the participants as they go through the scale and clarifies terms only, but does not score them. These are self-reported. And the best you can say about this is that these are well matched. I hope you agree with that, which may just speak to the limitations of the scale, but there we go. If you plot each participant with Parkinson's disease in diamonds, with motor disabled controls in these hatched notes, that their overall score for each individual participant, which I've just shown you is well matched, there's an interesting divergence up at the top end, where people with Parkinson's disease never quite score the very high scores of the motor disabled controls. That's entirely down to people who are committed Christians, or committed to their faith, committed Buddhists, who are unable to get to places of worship. So it's all down to motor disability at that top end. So these are some of the measures of mobility and cognitive function in our groups, and I'm going to show you two slides that are very similar. So Parkinson's disease cohort in grey, motor disabled controls in white. This is year 0, this is year 1 for each of these. And there's nothing terribly surprising here, but out of due diligence, I'll show this to you. So people with Parkinson's disease over the course of a year become less mobile, whereas our motor disabled controls don't. On the whole, they have less progressive disease. People with Parkinson's disease over the course of a year experience a deterioration in their ability to perform some memory tasks. This is paired association learning. So we did the entire, for those who know about this, who are interested, we did the Cantab battery on all patients. And we pick out this one as showing some signs of cognitive impairment over a year, which you would expect, and there's no change in patients with non-neurological conditions. The Stroop, a measure of attention, didn't change, which surprises me actually. I would anticipate that worsening in people with Parkinson's disease. And we have the one-touch stocking test for people interested, which is about executive planning, for which there wasn't actually a change in either group internally. There was an external difference at 1 year, with people with Parkinson's performing less well than controls, which I'm not sure I want to put too much weight on. We did many other tests which did not reveal any significant differences, and I don't want to make any grand claims for this other than we saw the expected changes from Parkinson's disease experienced over 1 year. So now the question is, was there any change in measures of spirituality? So in terms of the overall score on the measure that we chose to put most prominence on, there was no change in the Parkinson's disease group. There was a reduction in total score in the motor disabled control group over 1 year, and this was attributable to changes in the items on the score associated with meaning. The meaning that you place on God and faith. In terms of positive spiritual experiences, there was no change. In terms of religious practice, interestingly, there was no change overall over the year, except in the motor disabled controls, where we saw a reduction in the frequency of attendance at any place of worship. And I don't want to speak to this one because the error bars are just so wide here. So this was an unexpected outcome. Now, what we haven't got to in these sort of data is a handle on the third and fourth questions that I asked, which is, does having a faith help you cope with Parkinson's disease? Or even, does having a serious illness like Parkinson's disease make you think about faith and matters of religion more frequently and more seriously than you otherwise would? And the way we've tried to get at that is through interviews. Claire did these in a semi-structured way, and I thought I would report back some of the things people said. So the first thing is that very few people said that their faith or lack of faith had changed. 3 of the Parkinson's disease group reported negatively, said that they feel they've been abandoned by God, or they blame God for their disease, although even that is modified. It's easy to think you've kind of been abandoned, and then another day you'll think, well, thank goodness you do believe that something is there, because you can say, well, help me out with this, don't let this happen. One person who was agnostic reported that it has made me more interested in faith and religious matters before, because sooner or later it's going to get worse, and I need to find some way of coping. The motor side of this was significant. So this Buddhist meditator who had been in the custom of meditating every day found that there was a real problem with the shaking and the movement side of this disease. And most of the Parkinson's disease patients reported that existential questions remained important to them. This Christian said, I know there's a God, I'm trying to prove to myself where he is, what he is, where he came from, and whether he cares about us. There's a lot out there. And my last slide on this, I believe I'm not alone. I'm not doing this myself, I've sat here. I can think, well, I've been given them for a reason, I don't know what the reason is. And this is someone who classified themselves as spiritual but not religious. This Christian talked about an anchor. My faith helps me through difficult times. It's a good feeling, because otherwise you've got nothing. So our conclusion is that we found no evidence for a reduction in spirituality in Parkinson's disease compared to people with non-neurological disabling disease. So we would argue against the McNamara studies, and we think that more work